Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for this new gTLD webinar session. We're going to discuss in detail about the upcoming 2026 new gTLD program next round. So we have John Matson joining us. I'm going to give a small introduction about myself and I'll let John introduce himself and we'll get started from there. So I'm Venky Venkatesh. So I'm a domain registrar consultant. I'm in this industry for last 10 years and I'm a computer science engineer from Anna University. And I run a company called DotUp. We provide consulting service for domain registrars. I have helped close to 32 companies in successfully getting approved for ICANN accreditation and to become an accredited domain registrar. And I also have written a book, ICANN Accreditation Made Easy. I split my time between Toronto, Canada, and Mumbai, India, half the year. Uh, John, you would like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is John Matson, and I'm just really glad to be here today and with Venky. I call Venky the hardest working man in ICANN. He wrote a book. He does seminars. He just gets a lot done. But we came together to do this seminar on new gTLDs. So my background is I'm an engineer by training. You see some rockets and other stuff on the top. I actually started my career designing solid rocket motors with the Air Force and then with General Dynamics. And eventually I got into consulting with Ernst & Young and KPMG. And I did aerospace work for like 25 years. But in 2007, I got this call from a partner who said, "Hey, can you go see this little company in Marina Del Rey? They need some consulting help." And that was ICANN. And that call changed my life. I pretty much stopped working in aerospace, and since that time, I've pretty much only done internet infrastructure work globally. And I just love this industry. And so with ICANN back then, helped them with their strategic plans in 2011, 2012, helped them design the new gTLD program itself with a team of consultants that we had. And then I stepped on the other side. And so I worked with about 50 applications during round one, all the way through. I was the CEO for .art when we launched .art in 2016, 2017. And then also I've just worked with registries and registrars since then. So just really happy to be here today to share. Like Venky, I split my time partly in Canada and partly in Los Angeles, and I always like to tinker on old cars. But if I could ask everybody to mute their phones and then or phone or log in, and we'll get started. Go ahead, Venky.
Thank you so much, John. It's nice to know quite a transition from aerospace to domain. I hope you're enjoying it. All right, so let's jump on to the next slide. So we today in this webinar we're going to cover most of the topics regarding the domain name and the new gTLD. So we're going to talk about the internet and the DNS domain name system, but in a nutshell. And also we're going to talk about international IDNs, internationalized domain names, and universal acceptance. We also will talk about the new gTLD program and where and the little history of it, when it was started and why it was started. And we'll also talk about the timelines and resources involved in applying for the new gTLD in the next round. And we'll have a quick question and answer session at the end of the call. So if you have any questions of urgency, just feel free to put it on the chat, and we are monitoring it. And if you have any questions, please note it down and we will take the questions at the end. Let's jump right into the presentation.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge ICANN because many of the slides that you'll be seeing today were prepared by ICANN to get consistent material out to the community. And so really appreciated it. There was none of this back in 2010, 2011 when we were preparing for the 2012 round. It was difficult to actually get official schedules and things. But as you can see, if you look at this schedule, we're on the left-hand side of that in January of 2025. There's two programs that are currently active, the applicant support program and the registry service provider pre-evaluation program. We'll touch on those lightly, but what we're really focused on is getting to April of 2026, which is the opening of that purple bar. The window for gTLD submissions opens, and it'll be open for a few months and then close. But today we want to talk more about that program. Please go to the next slide, Venky. It's a little more detailed on what's going on. So as I said, there's a few things in parallel right now that ICANN's doing, the applicant support program, the registry service provider evaluation. But the most relevant thing to our discussion today is the applicant guidebook. And that is the document that oversees the application process, identifies the criteria and the evaluation approach, and it really is what an applicant needs to be aware of. So we're sitting here today in January of 2025, and the applicant guidebook is scheduled to be complete by the middle of Q2 2025. So there's a lot of people working right now to get the edits completed, and then those will be approved by ICANN soon after. If that happens, there'll be roughly a 1 year stable time from when the requirements are locked down and the application window opens. And that's just important because if you are applying for a new gTLD, you want to know clearly the terms at which you are applying and the requirements you'll have to meet. And just a note here, the application fee in the last round was $185K. The application fee in this round will be $227,000. But again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. If the applicant guidebook is not completed on the planned time, I would imagine the applicant window might slip a little bit just to keep that 1 year consistency between finalization and the application window opening. Next slide, Venky.
All right.
So you may ask, why is this here? I love this picture because essentially when I said I just fell in love with the internet infrastructure, this picture kind of captures it. Because I can be sitting in Los Angeles and I can send an email to Venky, who's at this time over in Mumbai, and I'm confident he's going to get it. I'm confident that that's going to happen. Or I'm a small business owner in Des Moines, Iowa, and I package materials and goods out of my garage and I ship them off to Australia, South America, Africa. This phenomenal asset that's been created is a network of networks, and it's redundant, resilient, and it's all built upon the DNS. And one thing that you have to understand is if you become a gTLD operator, you become one of those points of light in this network. And you have to make sure that that TLD is always on, always operating, so that small business or that hospital is able to perform the functions that they're relying on the internet to do. So this is no small task or no small responsibility, but it's a wonderful world to be a part of. And like I said, I just love it.
That's why they call it you own a piece of an internet.
That's right.
All right, so the next slide.
So how do we navigate the internet? Most people just really recognize domain names, but really there's two identifiers that have to be brought together. So when the internet was first formed, it was just one computer talking to another computer. And so the internet protocol IP address was effective for two computers talking to each other. But when you bring the human element into the address process, that's not sustainable. So the idea of domain names were created. And so an actual resource address on the internet is identified by two things. One is the IP address, and the second is a domain name. And that's really what this responsibility entails, is operating that domain name registry such that the internet can be used, that people can find resources, and they can navigate.
All right.
And simply a domain name is the top level, which is the right of the dot. So in this example, the domain name is ICANN.org. So the TLD is .org, and ICANN is the second level. And you'll see you can have third, fourth, other extensions, but that's the basic element of what a domain name is.
All
Next.
right. So here I would like to talk about IDNs a little. So you might all know, so they might anybody from China or from maybe from Turkey or somebody from Japan have a website in their local language or their regional languages, but the web addresses are still conventionally always in English or Latin characters. So in 2012, so ICANN decided why not have website names website names ending in their regional languages. So we came up with something called as internationalized domain names, which is called IDNs, which lets you create a top level domain name on not just Latin characters, but in local regional languages as well. So this was a part of the universal acceptance, and that's where the IDN began. John, you want to add something to here?
Yeah, and that's part of what ICANN's mission is to provide consumer choice, but also provide domain names in the characters that local people can understand. And since it was primarily a Western technology, it's now a global technology, and that's a really important part of what the new gTLD program brought. Next slide. So I want to use a little bit of data. And being an engineer, I just love data. But what this chart shows is it uses .com as a proxy for the global internet, but it shows from 1985 when the first domain name was sold. And now, if you guys don't know, if you're not a geek, it's symbolics.com on the 15th of March, 1985, all the way up to today in 2025. So 40 years later almost. But there's been an awful lot of world and global events that have occurred in that time, and yet the internet has continued to grow and thrive. We went through the dot-com boom and bust. We went through economic challenges in 2008 with the subprime mortgage. And then dot-com actually faced a huge amount of competition when 1,000 new gTLDs were released into the world on the last round. And, as you can see there, com actually grew a little bit. New technologies have come out into the market. Web3 came out. We even had a global pandemic. I do risk management, and I always ask companies, show me your risk register, and did you have global pandemic in there under your black swan events? But yet the internet thrived, and actually the internet was one of the key technologies that helped us get through and survive the global pandemic. Recently, AI is launched. And now you see the downturn in about 2021, .com hit a plateau. It was at about 170,000 or 160 million names, and the growth just flatlined. And when you're at 160,000 names and you have a 75% renewal rate, that means you've got to sell 40 million names a year just to stay constant. And you got to sell about 50 million names if you want to grow. And so com has slowed down, AI has launched, and we've now got the launch of the new gTLD coming in the next round. We're not sure how.
Just quickly, sorry to interrupt. Here we mean not .ai TLD, but it's AI as an artificial intelligence as a technology.
Yes, sorry, AI is technology. But it's just interesting to see how the global events have affected domain names. And you need to consider that because you have to create a business model for your TLD in the next round. Let's keep going, Venky. So what is the expansion? It's been going on for a long time. The first 7 you see at the beginning with .com on the left-hand side. There's been multiple expansions that ICANN's done. So sometimes this is called the second round. It really isn't. This is probably the 5th round of expansions. But over 1,200 new gTLDs were brought in the last round. And we've got some data that kind of looks how that happened. Next slide. So this goes back to the last round. There was 1,300 or 1,930 applications, of which one company, Donuts, submitted 307. Google, they actually submitted 101, and Radix, one other registry, did about 31. But they didn't all get those. There was 234 contention sets, which means that one or more, or there was more than one applicant applying for a string. And so in that case, you had to resolve that. And we'll talk a little bit more about contention resolution. Very few strings were not approved last time. So as you can see, there's 9 here listed. 3 of them, .corp, .home, and .mail, were not approved because of their conflict with intranet networks at businesses and the problem that may happen with collisions. And then there were others that were objected to by governments, and so they were not approved. But essentially, 1,235 were delegated by ICANN. And it's really important to see the time it took to get to those delegations, because we applied in 2012, and it wasn't until 2013 that the first applications were delegated and actually had the opportunity to go live. And roughly 75 or 80 out of those 1,200 were in 2013. Then 400 more in 2014, 400 more in 2015, 340 in 16. So you can see the bulk. If you applied in 2012, you had to have funds. Siddharth, could you mute your line, please? So you had to have funds to sustain your business all the way until the application was approved. And this time, ICANN's working very hard to compress this and not let delegations take this long. Whereas what took a year in the last round, I would kind of compare it to say I would hope it'd take a quarter in this round. So much faster, hopefully. Next slide. So there's this comment of a more inclusive internet, and there's 2 aspects of that. We've talked about internationalized domain names a little bit before, and that really opens up domain addresses to local languages that are not Latin based, and that hopefully will allow the internet to be more meaningful to a wider population around the globe. There's a second that's more technical, and it's called universal acceptance. But what that really means is the internet was born with just first 7 TLDs, then CCTLDs, 2 letters, but there was always a limited number that if you built a computer system on the internet that you needed to know. And so technologists would just hard code tables that had either a TLD is 2 or 3 letters, but they wouldn't have enough room for a 5-letter top level domain, or they actually hard coded the names themselves. So there's systems out there that may not recognize a new gTLD, and that has diminished significantly over the last 15 years, obviously because some legacy applications are retired and the awareness. But universal acceptance is a big thing that you at least need to be aware of. I use a .consulting TLD, johnmatson.consulting, and I've never had a problem with any email system recognizing my emails. Sometimes spam, I have to work with people to understand, and they'll look, but that's just something to be aware of. Next slide. So let's go into the actual program itself. Go ahead, Venky. So the whole point of the program is to bring newness, new use cases for domains, or new communities to be developed about it. And that's really what ICANN's trying to do. These are examples of what happened in the last round. There's either industry specific type ones, there's location based, cities or regions, as we talked about the internationalized domain names. But a big part is brand. Over 400 brands applied last time. And while brands are still struggling to figure out, I would like to use one example. If we go to the next slide, Venky. Well, actually, it's two. I forgot. These are the community or the opportunities for those communities to be built in. As I said, brands, 450 to 500 applied. Many of them did not use their brand. They applied it as a defensive registration. And just one quick story. In 1996, in the aerospace world, one of the things was the emergence of websites for corporations. And I remember being in a meeting in New York City with a global aerospace and defense company that built and sold both business jets and fighter jets. And we were pitching them a website for $1 million to build a website for them. And the head of operations was very adamant, said, there is no way ever in the future anyone is going to buy a jet online, nor are they going to trust parts that they buy over this thing. And he held up a product catalog that was probably 4 pounds. Well, obviously, things change. And just like now, if you were a global business, you couldn't think about operating without a website. I would offer that in the decades to come, brands and organizations will learn how to operate their business on a TLD, not just a website. And that's a great opportunity for what I think applicants in this round should look at. Geographies have shown that they're successful. CCTLDs are 2-letter top-level domains. They are the backbone of 40% of the internet. And so having a TLD for a city or geography or region is a great opportunity. And then also targeting customer relationships is part of the brand. But let's move on. So the one example I want to bring up is a French company. This French company, Leclerc, was on leclerc.com as their main global brand identifier. And in the last round, they applied for and got .leclerc, and they successfully transitioned in 2020 off of leclerc.com to e.leclerc as the primary, and they now run a $50 billion business entirely on e.leclerc and .leclerc. And the reason they did it is they wanted to put their brand at the top of the DNS. They wanted to enhance the trustworthiness online and also have more strength in cybersecurity as well as combat phishing. And because they're a business, they have secure online payments. And so for them, it was critical that they have their own top-level domain. Now, Microsoft, Google, and others are beginning to partially use their TLD, like State Bank of India has done a very good job, as well as Bradesco and PNB Paribas. But to date, it's not been as extensive as you'll see Leclerc. Next slide.
Yeah, even I would like to add, Audi is doing a really tremendous job, and as you mentioned, State Bank of India, their domain name bank.sbi has like 16 million user traffic on a monthly basis. That's one of really notable success story here.
One
So,
of the
all
other,
right,
no, that's
yeah, you want to talk about, yeah.
One of the other aspects is geographies. And so what this picture shows is just the city TLDs, Tokyo, London, Istanbul, et cetera, and what the monthly traffic that those websites that are in those top-level domains experience. And so essentially what that's saying is that businesses in Tokyo that have a .tokyo address generate over 85 million unique visitors a month to their websites. London about 35 million. Istanbul, we were just there for the gTLD or for the ICANN meeting. There must be a lot of cats that go online in Istanbul, but you can see, and it goes down. But this is a great opportunity for cities and regions to have an identity for small and medium-sized businesses to be local. Now, one other observation is the last round was in 2012. People have asked, well, what TLDs are out there? It weren't all the good extensions taken? And I can say obviously not, because this is just a list of technologies or social trends that have, come about since 2012. And the biggest thing that people talk about now is blockchain and cryptocurrencies, but there's so many other topics, quantum computing, drones, voice assistants, electric vehicles, and when you look on the social side, climate activism, there's inclusion, and inclusion has taken such an interesting turn in the last month with the changes in the United States. But there are plenty of great opportunities for great extensions, due to the fact it's been, it'll be 14 years. Next slide.
By the time the application opens, I guess it'll be 15 years, right?
Yeah, roughly. So what are the benefits? Well, we talked a little bit about brand management. We talked a little bit about, being at the top of the DNS, but part of it is you have control over your policies and your security. And one example is .bank. And so if you .bank extension, you must be a bank to have .bank. And so you control policies and you can craft your namespace to fit the business model that you want to do. Next slide. Want to come back to it is serious business to apply for an operator registry, because as we talked about before on that network of network slides, you are operating a piece of the internet, which requires 100% uptime, just like dial tone. And you've also got to support all of the gTLD registrants for as long as their names are registered. And it's not like when a gTLD fails, all those websites or domains that are counting on the operation of that TLD can't just be turned dark. And so ICANN has a process that if a registry fails, there's an emergency backend registry operator that quickly all of those businesses and websites and domains are transferred to. So it's a very serious proposition to take on the responsibility to be a registry operator. But what do you get to do? You get to set the requirements for the gTLD and determine which second level domains are able to be registered and by whom. Next slide. So how do they determine whether or not you're a worthy applicant? Well, the applicant guidebook will outline about 50 questions that you'll need to answer. And I've just summarized them. Venky helped me to just summarize them here so that you could get a sense. The applicant guidebook is several hundred pages long, and you'll need to become very familiar with it. The first 12 questions are just all about the applicant. You'll have to go through an official background check. They'll be looking to see if there's been any cyber squatting or any behavior that is contrary to the ICANN principles. But that's the first administrative 12 questions. Then the next set of questions is all about the string. What is the string? And question 18 is going to be the most important. It's what's your mission and purpose for the string? What's the benefit to users? And how are you going to minimize social costs? Now, you're fortunate in that there's roughly 1,900 applications out there that wrote this material before. So you'll be able to get some comparators to get some insight, but still your business model is critical. Questions 23 to 44 are the technical operations. And this is where I'll talk a little bit about the Registry Service Provider program. In the last round, all the technical questions were evaluated for each applicant. What ICANN realized, though, is there's a limited set of back-end registry service providers that applicants will outsource to. And so why not pre-approve those, because they're already operating TLDs today. So if you're an applicant, you'll get your approval of a registry service provider, and these questions will be handled by them. But you still have to be clear on what are the registry services in question 23 that you are uniquely doing in your registry. And then the last set is the financials. And ICANN has identified 4 different types of financial applicants: a government, a publicly traded stock, an NGO, and all others. So a private company, entrepreneurs, anything that doesn't fit those other 3 categories. But you'll need to provide financial statements as well as a business model that shows the funding for the top level domain, how you're going to be able to both pay for the operating expenses and any capital over the first 3 years. And you also need to have a worst case scenario, which forecasts the number of domains that you would sell, and then a worst case scenario. One of the things we developed last time was a financial model to assist clients in doing that, and Venky and I will do similar this time. Next slide. So financial considerations. As we said, it's $227,000 for the application fee. There may be other smaller fees depending on some unique paths you might do. But it's a significant financial and technical commitment of resources. And you have to demonstrate that you have that capability through your answers in the application. Next slide. Contention sets. So last time, 234 contention sets, or more than one applicant, applied for the string. There was something at that point in time called the auction of last resort, which was once all the applicants were deemed to be qualified applicants, they then were put in an auction by ICANN, and the highest bidder won. And these are examples of the auctions that occurred in the last round. So if you are applying for a string that you believe will be popular, you need to realize that there will be additional costs, which are the competitive costs at auction, in order to achieve that. There was a separate process in the last round called private resolution that was allowing for the applicants to not go to the auction of last resort and to have an auction privately, and they would split the proceeds. So you actually lost the auction but got paid when you lost by the winner. So the fees didn't go to ICANN, they were split by the applicants. ICANN has identified that that is not an acceptable process for this round, and that any contention set will go to the auction of last resort. They are considering having the opportunity to submit an alternative string with your application, such that if you are in a contention set, you could opt out and choose your alternative string. That is a proposed modification that is being evaluated over these next couple months as the process moves forward. Next slide.
John, quickly, one more question I would like to ask here is, what about plural names?
Great question. So in the last round, plural names were allowed, as you can see, web and webs, car and cars. But it's deemed now that it's confusingly similar. And so if a top level domain exists today in plural form, the singular would not be allowed, or if it exists in singular form, the plural would not be allowed. And that's been approved so far as a change of the program going forward. One other thing on cost, and that's in applying for the gTLD, as we said, it's $227,000. A rough planning figure would be that you're going to spend another $227,000 or up to 2 to 3 times that, depending on your business and how complex, in preparing to submit your application. So it's not a cheap effort because you have consulting, legal, technical, other aspects that you need to spend money on to get an application ready. This is also in helping you to develop your financial model. This is some data that we pulled about existing top-level domains. And so these are the highest volume top-level domains for gTLDs of the last round. And you can see .xyz and then .online, .app, .top, shop, etc. The orange is the number of domains expiring in the year 2023. So these were registered in prior years and they're coming up for expiration. And the blue is the number of domains that actually renewed. And so renewal rate is the critical attribute of an annuity business. And so that forecast that you'll be making in your ICANN application, you will need to understand the type of renewal rate your top-level domain might experience. .com, for reference, does 74%. So 75% of all domains registered, as we talked about, get renewed. .xyz, not so much. Only 18% of the domains every year that are registered actually get renewed. Now online's a little higher at 31%, and .app for Google is the only top-level domain that even nears the performance of .com. .app does about 74%. .dev also does high as well for Google. And then you see .vip is doing well at 52%. The average for a gTLD is about 40%. And then you have some other ones that have very, very low, like SBS at 5%. So, but the great thing is none of this data was available for us when we applied in the last round. All this, we draw on this to help clients develop their business model for the next round. Next slide. So the registry operator responsibilities. There are two key aspects of it. One is registration, the other is resolution. So the left is the registration side of it is you have to manage and maintain a master database of all registrations. And that's known as a zone file. And you have to send that zone file out across the internet network so that traffic knows where to find websites and where to find your domains. The second thing you have to do is support resolution, which is you have to have a network of computers around the world that manage traffic and do the traffic routing. Much of this is an outsourced business on the traffic management and the DNS management, but still, as a registry, even though you outsource it, you are contractually responsible for it to ICANN. Hence, just like the phone, dial tone, you have to make sure that you have a service provider that meets the service level requirements of uptime. Next slide. So this kind of brings us back to where we started, which is the schedule. We are currently in January and we're moving towards January 2025. We're moving towards that anticipated Q2 2025, where the applicant guidebook should be finalized. And that's, and I believe that that's going to happen. There's a lot of people working on that. ICANN's been very public about their timeline and commitments to get there. So I think that it's a good high likelihood that'll happen. We then go towards the process of preparing for applications. If you don't have an RSP and want to be your own RSP, you can see that the RSP evaluation opens again in 2026. And so you can build your own system and apply to ICANN to have it evaluated. And but that kind of summarizes. Venky, turn it back to you.
Yeah. So we here, I think we had a very good discussion here where John get to share his wisdom about from his first round experiences and also guide us through the strategies and processes for the next round of new gTLD. I would like to put in some information about the resources you can probably refer from ICANN's website, and they have given quite a lot of information, and especially in their champions kit they have mentioned a lot of data points and analytics about the first round's TLDs, which kind of gives some idea to the applicants. And we'll jump right into the question and answer session. If you have any question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll take up some questions.
Yeah, you can go ahead and unmute, or you can type your question in the chat.
Any questions, feel free to. I guess you're doing a whiteboard.
Not sure who's drawing on the screen, but okay. Kind of looks like a bird.
Oh, hey, hi, Phil. Nice to have you today joining us. And let's give it another minute to see if.
Yep.
John, I guess you explained it so well that people don't have any questions.
Well, I recognize a few names who've heard some of this before, but yeah, I mean, I just encourage you to consider the new gTLD program. It provides an opportunity to own digital real estate, and it doesn't come around very often.
Yeah, it took really 15 years for the second round to come. So we really have no idea probably when the next round is going to be coming up. So I think this is a golden opportunity for brands and a lot of community-based organizations to grab the opportunity and apply for the new GTLD string. Yeah, so we have a couple of questions, John. So from Phil, can you tell us a little about applicant support program pre the next round? You want to jump in, John?
Sure, thanks, Phil. So the applicant support program is ICANN's effort to help applicants that are economically disadvantaged in some way, but have a very strong case for having a gTLD to support them. And so they've set funds aside that if you qualify, you will get a 75 to 80% reduction in your application fee. So do the math quick. I think it takes that $277,000 application fee down to only about $35,000, $40,000. But you have to meet criteria in that you need to be a not-for-profit or a very
Indigenous
recognizable
communities.
community entity or indigenous entity. The intention is to provide very well-deserving communities a reduction in their fees and provide them consulting assistance to submit a quality application so that they can get a top-level domain. And it's a great program. It's really worthwhile that you know organizations will be able to apply in disadvantaged economic communities around the globe where they otherwise would not be able to afford it. They still have to show that they can afford the ongoing costs of running a top-level domain, but the applicant support program is available to a few. It's not something that someone who just doesn't want to pay the high cost can try and get approved. That won't happen, I don't think. But that's a little bit about the applicant support program, and you can find out more for sure online with ICANN. And then Colin, how many applications? Um, it's hard for me not to look at 16 years and go, there's an awful lot of people that weren't around in business or in technology back then. And there's an awful lot of segments right now. Web3 has kind of learned that rather than being a competitor to the Web2 world, it's a enhancement to the Web2 world. Geographies, there's a lot of them, and brands, I think there's a lot. So honestly, for me, 2000 isn't a ridiculous number, because when we did the capacity planning for round one, ICANN was trying to figure out the number of top-level domains, and roughly at that point in time, there were 22 gTLDs and there were 250 ccTLDs. So that means the entire internet was roughly 275 TLDs. And the thought that, two times that, maybe 550, I think the capacity plan was like between 350 and 550 was what was expected. And when 1930 came out, I think everybody was quite surprised. But I don't think I would be surprised if it's that many. Siddharth.
So we have Siddharth asking us questions. So for a dot brand TLD, how much total budget should a company have? Yeah, yes, go ahead, John. I think I think you will probably able to add Wayne a lot of accurate information here.
Yeah, so you're going to budget probably at least 1 to 2 times the application fees, because you've got to go through the process of selecting a registry service provider. You've got to provide all of the documentation associated with the financial statements. You've got to have your business model as to what you're doing, and then you've got to have any of your policy statements, because essentially a brand registry can only provide domain names to wholly owned subsidiaries or the brand itself. Now, there is an interesting spin where OVH is a brand that applied in round one. They're a registrar and they applied for their own .ovh, but they did not apply for it as a brand. They applied for it as a generic so they could sell domain names to the market. But I would say 1 to 2 times application fee.
Yeah, you're right. So because I remember in the last round, so a couple of companies, brands which applied really thought of giving away those domain names to their dealerships or their reseller partner networks, and later they realized that it is impossible for them to give away domains or use the domains under those TLDs other than for any internal purposes. It has to be the brand itself, or it has to be a wholly owned subsidiary of the company. So that is one tricky part which applicants need to be aware of and navigate. Yeah, I think over the period of time, we'll be able to help clients if anybody is looking for setting up a specific policy on which direction you would like to apply for. All right, so we'll take a couple of more questions, and thank you, Siddharth. A couple of more questions, and
John, Colin here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Colin, welcome.
Thanks, John, and thanks for the excellent presentation. I learned a lot, so I appreciate it. Just to go back onto your budgeting for Adopt Brand, if we can drill down on it a little bit more, because my own back of a napkin calculations would suggest to me that I don't know if it's going to be as high as you suggest. And my rationale for it would be that in the next round, back-end registry services, for example, that has been quite commoditized. So I don't see them being as expensive. I think consulting fees will vary depending on the provider that you go to. And then you have your legal fees. So I don't know if you just go into a little bit more detail on how much it's going to cost. It just seems quite high to me to have another couple of $100,000, $250,000 on top of the application fee to get your application through successfully. I just feel it's a little on the high side for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, so that's the full range, because if you're making a defensive registration, absolutely. Defensive registration, it ought to be, to the lower end, as what you just pointed out. But my point is, if you want to be Leclerc, if you want to use that TLD, if you want to figure out how to build your business on that platform, then you've got to take some time to design a business model, to understand migration, other stuff. So that, that's why I say, if you're just securing it, you want to put it on the shelf, you don't want to do anything with it, absolutely. Minimum cost, like you identified. But if you want to actually then do something with your brand, which again, I think that's part of what we're going to see in the next decade, because the technology providers are starting to activate them. Banks are seeing the benefit of it. I got in this industry for usage, and that's what I love, is to see how these technologies can be used.
Yeah, thanks, John. I guess I had my brand TLD hat on and looking at the volume and the usage of the vast majority of them. They are kind of defensive, or certainly low registration volume. So I was kind of looking at it too much from that perspective. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, no, and Venky and I, we have our experience. Venky's got a huge amount of experience in helping clients through the application process to be a registrar, and so we understand that it's not a straightforward thing if you haven't done it before, and that's why we're excited to be able to try to work together to do this.
thanks, John. And it's an excellent question, Colin. All right, so we have Phil with another question. So, should add that once potential applicant has received its discounted application fee through ASP, it then has to submit a full new application in the next round. This will undoubtedly require substantial additional investment. Yes, I do think so. The reduction in the application fee alone is going to save a lot of the in the investment. So there is substantially, see, at the end of the day, if you are applying for a TLD, which means you are applying for the of to own a piece of the internet, it's a new gTLD. You have to run it as a registry. It does involve costs around it. So I guess it undoubtedly it will have a lot more cost involved in this. John, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, it's, ICANN's making available, support resources at a less cost to try to get things over the line. But at the end of the day, you still have to be a viable business. You still have to be able to cover the reduced fees. You have to cover the annual operating costs. So it's non-trivial. But what you do get is hopefully a break on the fees and some additional talent to help you get the application submitted.
Thanks, Colin. Have a great weekend too. Any more questions? We can take one more question.
Well,
Thank you,
thanks
Tim.
to a few friends who I see who came on. Appreciate it. You've listened to a voice maybe for a second time. And I also want to make sure that Venky and I thank ICANN again for putting out these materials. The scroll back one, Venky, or to the links. There are some links there. You can also obviously go to Venky and my websites or reach out to us via email. And I'll turn it over to Venky to close.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope it was a very informative session, and thanks John for sharing his wisdom with us about new gTLDs, his experiences from the first round, as well as strategies and ideas for the upcoming round. Uh, we are planning to have a lot of engaging videos and media informations, blog posts, and social media interactions consistently with you guys, with the community regarding the new gTLD next round. And we are poised to help the companies, brands, and organizations which are trying to apply for the new gTLD in the next round. And looking forward for a great year. And thank you everyone for joining us today.